The views, comments, stories, and opinions shared within this podcast are our own, or those of our guests, and in no way represent the views of the companies, associations, or organizations that any of us may work for or represent. All stories, events, and tales shared within this episode may or may not have happened in the manner in which they were told. They may or may not have even happened at all. The details have been changed to protect the innocent and the guilty alike. This is Squawk Ident.
You're listening to Squawk Ident, an aviation podcast that explores the many pathways to an aviation profession, the challenges that a professional aviator can expect in today's marketplace, and we share many stories along the way. I'm your host, Aviator Tony, a professional airline pilot currently flying for a U.S. legacy airline with close to 20 years on the flight line. Welcome aboard Flight 111, the Squawk Ident podcast recorded on the 8th of June, 2022, from the mobile Aviator Sound Studios high atop the 25th floor of the Prince Waikiki Hotel on the island of Oahu. On today's flight, Alex D and I will discuss his progress at Sandpiper Airlines, the initial ground school that he's in, and the CBTs that he's working on. We also have more exciting audio feedback from Captain Roger's corporate flying adventure as he checks in with us from Sicily, Italia. But most importantly today, we are very excited to be joined by a guest whose journey in aviation is just so impressive. He was a wide-body pilot, podcaster, and film producer. His journey in aviation dates back to the 1980s, where he graduated from San Jose State University with a Bachelors of Science in Aeronautics, Aviation, Aerospace Science and Technology. He continued his education, earning a digital media degree. It is also of no surprise that he is a consultant at Eon Reality and VP of Renzone, a digital media, analytics, and higher education company. And he is the creator and host of the Klezmer podcast, which highlights klezmer and Jewish musical artists from around the world. And as if that was not enough, in his spare time, he captains a 777 at Legacy Airlines, the alias to our employer, a U.S. mainline carrier. He holds type ratings in the DC-9, the 75, 76, and of course, the 777. Captain Keith Wolzinger will be joining us today, so stay tuned as we run our final checks and prepare to push off the gate. Flight 111 of the Squawk Ident podcast is officially underway. Joining me today is an exceptional aviator and flight instructor. He is a U.S. Navy Chief Information Systems Technician and a first officer at Sandpiper Regional, the alias to one of our Legacy Airlines' wholly owned regional airline. Joining us from the second floor of the Doubletree Hotel in Irving, Texas, where he's taking a break from his Embraer 175 CPT studies to be here. Help us in welcoming back to the show, Mr. Alex Daigle. Alex, how you doing?
Doing good, Tony. It's good to be back on. Been a week since we talked and saw each other. Got to run into you at the airport.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It was. You said you put out to the group. You're like, "Hey, I'm going to be in Dallas for airport. What do you call it? Airport reserve. If anybody's in the area, please stop by and keep me company, as I'll be bored for the next 3.5 hours."
Yeah, and that was actually the following day. We recorded the last podcast, 110, and then at the conclusion of that, we were going back and forth, and you said, "Hey, next time you're in Dallas, let me know. If I'm not in class, we'll come do lunch." And of course, the following day, I had the trip and 3-hour, like I call line holder reserve. You sit in Dallas for 3 hours and you're ripe for the picking for crew scheduling to call you and go, "Hey, we got a crew that misconnected, so we're giving you their flying." And then they have plenty of time to call someone from home, and then it can come in, a reserve pilot, and then take over your flying, which the contract unfortunately allows for this, and that's what we are working on, to try to make these improvements of quality of life so that when you start a trip, you do what you're supposed to do, unless something like mechanical or weather comes up. Unfortunately, this is more coming across as a line holder reserve. But that time frame, you were just getting out of class and you came running over to the airport. We had lunch. It was great to sit down. We actually recorded a little a video from the new terminal in Dallas-Fort Worth. Unfortunately, after listening to it a few times, there was nothing I can do. Man, that gate agent really was loud.
Oh, it's probably that new speaker system they have put in there, because that whole area is just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, and what was that, the Charlie gate? Charlie 39 or something like that?
Charlie, it was the end of the Charlies, like 30 something on up.
Yeah, so like the last 7 or 6 Charlie gates. And beautiful, beautiful. The furniture,
Yeah.
the overhead, the boarding signs were really cool. How they were integrated LEDs into the walls. It was really
It
cool.
makes it so that you couldn't miss A, your gate, and B, what group is boarding and how the standby list. Like you don't even need to go up to see the agent. Like, that's the incredible thing.
Yeah, I think that's the goal, is to become like McDonald's, where there is no one taking your order. You just push the button. As a matter of fact, I'm getting off the plane here in Honolulu last night. We were waiting for the cabin crew, and this elderly gentleman came up to me. Oh, are you the crew that flew us over here? And I'm like, yes, sir. How are you? How was the flight? Did you enjoy it? And he says, man, he goes, could they put a smaller airplane on this? What happened to the 2 aisles and all this stuff? And I was like, well, I'm sorry they put these 321 Neos on here. I know it's a little tight and the seats are uncomfortable, but and yeah, it was cool to talk to him. But yeah, he was recounting of a better day when there was a 777 that went from Phoenix to Honolulu. But anyway, how's the progress been so far with your training?
So we got through when you and I recorded. I was in the tail end of my systems courses. I got through systems Wednesday, had the FMS lab that next day, and then Friday we had, what did we have? Oh, it was the prep day to kind of get us used to what we're going to see in the CPTs, and that's cockpit procedure trainers. Gone are the days where you sit in front of like a paper tiger or a hard, like I sent you the picture of your old 145 paper tiger. They still have them.
Oh.
Um, but no, it's a all computer based touchscreen. You have throttles, you have an FMX box, you have everything that the airplane has. Just it's all touchscreen, and you go through basically the same thing of what you're going to see when you go into the sims. Just you're not flying the airplane. You're
Yeah.
Learning the box, learning your flows, learning your triggers, learning all this stuff on a flight, if you will.
Right.
So the first 2 days were Dallas to Oklahoma City. Yesterday was Tucson to Phoenix. Today's going to be Tucson to Phoenix, but they're changing things up as we go along. Today's going to be more into non-ILS approaches, so your RNAVs, your localizer type approaches, because the first days were all pretty much localizer ILS style, so that we could use the autopilot and have it fly down. And it's I tell you, this airplane is super, super, super smart.
Yeah.
The automation in it is incredible. So
yeah, anyone fortunate enough to go from flying piston-powered airplanes in general aviation to go to an Embraer 175, I mean, that's trick. I mean, back in the day, this is not something this was like mainline, basically, the type of airplane you're flying now, the automation, the size of it. So it's quite a leap, I would say, in education and muscle memory. And that's what the CPTs are all about, is to establish your muscle memory, so that when you're reading on the paper, all right, I click this button and then I push this button and then I verify this screen and I'm doing this stuff in an order. Sure, you can memorize that and you can write all the note cards you want. And you can actually put the paper tiger on the wall in your hotel room, and that helps tremendously. But until you get into the configuration of the cockpit, as that CPT trainer is made to do, with lights and touch screens that change and get manipulated, now your muscle memory is what you're developing, so that when you finally get into the simulator, you're not spending a day just trying to get that muscle memory down. You've already done it. It streamlines the process. And the fact that you have that available to you as a tool says a lot about the training at Sandpiper, that they really are into streamlining the process and sparing no expense, really, because those things aren't cheap.
And that's what they're trying to go for is excuse me. That's what they're trying to go for, is the fact that back in the day when you were going through, and even the guys who are captain upgrades now, were saying that they were still using that same device that you used when they trained on the 145.
Yeah.
And it promotes good muscle memory of like touching the buttons and everything, but you're not manipulating the buttons. You're not manipulating the switches. You're not getting that like, oh, this actually turns left and right versus, I'm touching it.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it easier for us as we're transitioning, that this whole time right now is to prep us. That's literally all it is to prep us for when we go into the sims.
Yeah.
So that way we're not on the first day, wasting an hour and a half trying to program a box. We're, actually getting in and flying the airplane and doing the lessons and all that stuff.
And at the same time, it also puts a little bit of pressure on you, because now that first time you're in the sim, there's this feeling of, okay, I should be able to get in here and it should be a seamless transition. Versus when I was doing this, you'd get in the simulator, and the first day you were just there looking around going, wow, look at all the pretty lights, and the instructor knew that, and that's what the whole point was. So yeah, it's fantastic to hear your progress. We look forward to hearing more about your progress here as the shows are now starting to come out, maybe with a little bit more frequency. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Hey, you're welcome. That's why part of the reason why I agreed to be on the show was to share my progress and journey for the next guys coming through.
Yeah. And Roger wanted to be here. He is back from his tour all over the world, his global 2-week event. But yeah, we went back and forth this morning, and he's just not adjusted to the time zone changes yet, and needs to catch up with his family. So we're very fortunate that he did send us some more audio feedback. It's actually a little video clip that he took from Sicily, and I'll just play that for you right here.
Good morning again, Squawk Ident. This is Captain Roger. This time coming to you from Palermo, Sicily, Italia. Got up extra early again this morning. Not sure why. I'm wandering the streets, which are deserted right now. I kind of always laugh. I was at dinner last night. We showed up at about 8:30 and there was nobody in the restaurant, and they told us that the restaurant was reserved and was full. Apparently they eat dinner extremely late here. And the flip side of that is then that I guess everybody else, they wake up. They don't wake up until 10. So I'm out here by myself at about, 6:45 or so in the morning on a short walk. It's definitely an interesting place here in Palermo. I can see how it's got some charm to it, but you got to kind of scratch through the initial facade of it, since it is kind of old and fairly dirty, and you can pass by a couple cars here. Trying not to get run over all the time because of these narrow streets. So we're only for Istanbul for two full days, which were pretty full. Istanbul was a very interesting city, actually. A city of 16 or 18 or something million people. It was pretty crazy. Had a good time there. Definitely a much slower pace here in Sicily. The flight itself was somewhat interesting. I've talked several times before about Europe and the slots and making sure that you hit your times, and our passengers requested an earlier departure than what we had already set up and been approved for. And then, of course, the traffic in a city of 16 million people, the passengers were then late, and we missed our time, which then created a little bit of a headache that required calling multiple phone calls and emails to different entities, getting new slot times and a new flight plan. So if you're ever in Europe, my suggestion is once you have a time, don't change it. Make sure that you get everybody there extra early just to avoid those headaches. The flight itself from Istanbul down here to Sicily was just right about 2 hours. And then we're going to be leaving to actually come back to the States on Tuesday of next week. Today's Saturday morning right now, where I'm at. Still probably Friday evening for the rest of the Squawk Ident crew. So we're going to be going back to Trapani, actually, where the airplane is tomorrow. We'll be there for a couple days. We're going to fuel the airplane prior so that we don't need to worry about it the morning of our departure. And then we're going to be flying from Trapani to Shannon, Ireland, where we're going to make a tech stop for fuel. Actually use the pre-clearance facility that even general aviation aircraft can use in Shannon, Ireland. And then we're going to make the flight from Shannon, Ireland, all the way back across to Atlanta, Georgia, where we're going to spend the night before making the final trek back home to the Southern California area. I'm going to walk down this one last street here as I make my way back to the hotel, but since I was out, it was nice and quiet. I thought I'd do a quick video update. I'll send this to Captain Tony, your ever-present and dedicated host. And hopefully the next time I'll be able to join everybody live. Hope everybody's well. Fly safe. Take care.
Well, that was kind of cool for us here in the studio to see the streets of Sicily early in the morning. Yes, I can attest that we Italians like to have our evening meal and then walk in the piazza, get some gelato, talk to the neighbors, talk about politics, get your hands up in the air and yell, hey, what's the matter, you? What do you think? And then somewhere around midnight, usually, you're tired, and after a couple shots of grappa, you go to bed, or, sambuca or whatever. So, yeah, people sleep in usually, especially in the villages. They sleep in kind of late, even during the week. But, hey, thank you again, Captain Roger, for sending that audio and video in. That was really cool.
Yeah, that was awesome. It was cool to see, and hopefully we get him back on the show soon.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, today we are so very honored to also have on our show a featured guest that has been one of our podcast's biggest supporters. Our journeys collided when he reached out to me online to write some encouraging words about Squawk Ident. Our next encounter happened in the Legacy Airlines LAX pilot ops when he introduced himself as a fan. How cool is that? That is when I found out that among the fact that he is a senior wide-body captain at the largest airline in the world, he's also a fellow podcaster. We are honored to have you join us on Squawk Ident, sir. Please help us in welcoming to the show Captain Keith Wolzinger. Captain, how you doing?
Hey, Tony. Hi, Alex. Doing great. Glad to be with you guys.
So we're just so honored to have you on. We've been trying to work out our schedules here for a while, and I'm just really happy that this worked out.
Yeah, I just got off a 6-day trip, Los Angeles to London to New York, back to London, and then finally back to Los Angeles. So I got a few days off now, so time to catch up.
Yeah, and is that schedule something that's pretty typical on a 777 to do back and forth like that for 4 days?
It's gotten to be more frequent in recent months. It has been typically like a 3-day trip. You go over somewhere and then you come back. But with staffing issues, new routes, a lot of TDYs around the system, they find it occasionally more convenient or better scheduling practice to pair a double trip so that they don't have to TDY as many people or use so many reserves. And plus, with the reduction of what was primarily Asia flying from the West Coast, that's been completely shut off now. They're finding other places for us to go.
Yeah, it's been quite an interesting juggle of the logistics of running, the world's largest airline. We've seen that also on the narrow body, where we're going into locations that I used to frequent so much as a regional airline pilot. And I mean, I don't mind because it's kind of like taking a step back of nostalgia and enjoying, Kalamazoo or Grand Rapids or something for an evening. But yeah, it's an interesting. Now, you've been flying for quite some time. Have you seen this kind of shuffle in schedules before?
Not this much. The schedules for many years were pretty consistent, and the airline would, I'd say, dedicate themselves to a particular route, whether they made a lot of money or not so much money, they always had a presence on the route. Now they look to see where they can make money, and that's where they fly. Sometimes that's a seasonal thing, summertime destinations to Europe, wintertime destinations to the ski slopes. And then some of the places with fewer places, they're flying year round. So they and you notice this on domestic as well. There's a lot of shuffling of destinations and routes.
Yeah.
So it's probably better for the airline, probably a little less predictable for the passenger, and a little bit less predictable for us as crew members. But I think the airline is doing a pretty good job of maximizing their profitability that way.
Yeah. And it, I mean, I don't mind it because I get to see some places that are pretty cool, but it can lead to some long days. I mean, these, at least on the Airbus, 5-day trips that have dual Hawaiis with red eyes on both ends. It's like, oh yeah, those are a little bit much on the circadian rhythm.
Well, what gets me now is that you can exceed 8 hours under certain circumstances under 117, which 8 hours was a hard rule for the whole time I was on domestic. So
yeah,
that's changed. I'm not sure that I don't want to be doing that necessarily so much. I don't know how often you exceed 8 hours scheduled, but I guess you do occasionally.
Yeah, every couple months. Like I think I have a trip at the end of the month that carries over into July that has one day where it's 8 hours and 30 minutes of flight time. And it's just a transcon to Miami and then up north to New York. And it's just like, really? But hey, it's legal unless we take a 45-minute delay, slow down the aircraft en route, and then go illegal by the time we land. Just saying. I mean, it could happen. But, sir, I really appreciate having you on because, man, I was doing my due diligence before the show, a little bit of research, and I kept discovering about your history and your path. I was just so impressed. Now, let's start out with the beginning. How did you come into this passion for aviation? Did it start off like at a very young age, or?
Yeah, about age 5, maybe sooner. My grandparents lived 2 blocks off the east end of the runway at Santa Monica Airport. So every airplane that came into land there came very low over their house. And if a Learjet or Gulfstream came in, it literally shook the house.
Wow.
But I thought it was pretty cool. And the airport back in the day had a observation deck, and they had a speaker where they would play the air traffic control transmissions, and so you could listen to them and then watch the planes. So my grandfather would take me, and we'd go for an hour or so and go watch airplanes, listen to them. And it was right by where the fuel pit was, so people would be fueling up their plane, Bonanza, whatever they had, and wave to me up on the balcony there at the observation deck. And then I grew up in Torrance, California, and we're a few blocks off the departure end of the runway at Torrance Airport. And so every airplane that took off out of there flew over my house. Then when I was 5 years old, I was with my parents on a flight, actually on Legacy Airlines, 707 to New York, where my parents were from. And we took off, and the houses got smaller, the cars got smaller, and clouds were going by, and we came into land, and the houses got bigger, and the people and the cars got bigger. And that was pretty cool. And then shortly after that, we flew on Pan Am 707 out to Honolulu.
Yeah.
And that's when they let little kids go in the cockpit during the flight and talk to the pilots. And they had a navigator and the flight engineer and everybody. And, they gave me the set of Pan Am Junior pilot wings. And they said, son, one day you're going to be an airline pilot. And I said, cool.
Do you still have those wings?
I have quite a collection of junior pilot wings. Actually, the first one I got was on the Legacy Airlines 707. And it was a ring, a junior pilot ring, like a pinky ring.
Oh, wow. I never
So
heard
I
that.
have some of those. And the Pan Am one, I have TWA, I have National Airlines, I have United, Alaska, Delta, that I've, and I still ask my friends if they're going on an airline I haven't been on, and say, ask them for some wings to add to my collection. So I'm still collecting.
That's cool.
And then, but what actually happened was I got interested in aviation, and at about age 12, I think I started subscribing to Flying Magazine. And when I got to high school, my high school in Torrance, California had a flying club as one of their sponsored clubs. Our faculty sponsor was one of the government history teacher guys. He was a retired Air Force B-24 pilot, lieutenant colonel. And so we had flying clubs. So we would sit around at lunch hours and plot out cross countries. And he had all these old charts and plotters and, manual for a Cessna 150 and figure out the fuel burn and the time and distance. And then once a month, he'd arrange a field trip to some local aerospace related place. We go to the TRACON at LAX or maintenance hangar. And in those days, in the early 70s, Flying Tigers, Continental, Western were all headquartered at Los Angeles. So they had simulators, and we'd go play in the simulators at Flying Tigers and fly a DC-8 simulator around. We'd go fly simulators at Western or Continental, see their training facilities. It was an incredible experience. I made one friend through a CB radio at the time that was a 747 mechanic, and took us out to the airport, the giant hangar out there at LAX, and went through a 747 and, showed us around. So, and then when I was 14, I wanted to go try gliders, because you can get a student pilot license and solo glider at 14 and get a private license and a glider at 16. So I made my dad drive me out to the desert to the glider school out there when I was 14. I took a discovery flight in the glider and said, yeah, Dad, I want to do this. And my dad was pretty supportive, but he said, I'm not going to drive 2 hours every weekend out to the desert so you can go fly a glider. So, and I was pretty devastated, because then that meant I had to wait from 14 to 16 to be able to solo an aircraft. So when you're 14, a 2-year wait is like forever.
Yeah.
But I was also doing marching band in high school, and our drum major in the high school band was also in Civil Air Patrol cadets. And he said, hey, Keith, you like airplane stuff, don't you? And I said, yeah. I said, well, why don't you come to Civil Air Patrol? You're already doing marching band, so you already know how to march, and you learn a lot of marching in the Civil Air Patrol cadets. Shout out to everybody in the Civil Air Patrol out there. And our leader out there was a CFI. He had owned a Cessna 150B 1962 model and a 1947 Navion. And he was instructing, or offering to instruct, a handful of kids in the program that he thought would, be good candidates to go into flying. And so at 15 and a half, I was able to start my flight training with him. And he worked for United as in a ground position in the cargo department. And so he was, working for United, so he knew all the airline stuff. We had a few kids go through the program who went on to airline careers also. And so I was 15 and a half. So either my dad would drive me out to the airport for my lesson, or I would ride my bike out to the airport for my lesson, because it wasn't very far from where we lived.
Yeah.
Take my lesson. So I soloed at 16, got my private at 17. Then went on to San Jose State and completed my program there. And while I was there, I got my instrument commercial multi. And then after graduation, got my CFI, II, MEI, and so the USC part of that was the last semester before graduating at San Jose State. We were required to present a little report on any graduate school program, just in case. This was 1979. This was after the energy crisis, the second energy crisis. The little extra tidbit was the airlines were hiring big in 1978. So a lot of people got hired across the airlines in 1978. In 1970, and I was saying, well, shoot, I'm in school. I should be out trying to get an airline job. So then in 1979, there was the second energy crisis and the airlines furloughed everybody.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So then I said, well, I'm sure glad I'm in school, not trying to get an airline job. So, but we had to research a graduate school program. And it turns out that one of my Boy Scout leaders, retired Navy pilot, Jerry Detweiler, who's still kicking around. I hear he's retired and living in Colorado somewhere. Was my old scoutmaster, lived on my block growing up, and was working at the USC safety department, what they call the Institute of Safety and Systems Management. And so I knew he worked there. So I said, Mr. Detweiler, I had to do a report on some graduate school program. Do you have some stuff you can, let me have, and I can make my report? Well, he sent me a packet, this thick of their program of aviation safety and systems management. Mm-hmm. So I made my report, and of course I graduated that year in 1980, and nothing was happening. So I talked to him again, and he said, you should come and take our program. So basically I got recruited into taking the aviation safety from him.
Yeah.
And so I completed that program, 2-year program, during which time I was also starting as a flight instructor, which now at the same time, all those airline pilots were being furloughed. So I was going to flight schools in the area, and there'd be a furloughed guy from Western, sitting interviewing for the same position. I get to talk to the chief instructor, and they say, well, how much instruction time have you given? So, well, here's my temporary instructor certificate. Haven't, so how do I compete with the guy furloughed from Western for a flight instructor job? So I went around and around, and I couldn't get anything. Finally, a good friend of mine referred me to the Aero Club at Marine Corps Air Station El Toro, because they had taken over, a new manager was taking over their facility to run the flight school. They had an interesting situation because at the Aero Club on any military base, you have to be base military to get a plane, rent a plane, or teach there. And the limitation is that those people are doing it on the side. So if they're active duty, their main job is to, be a pilot or ground staff, whatever, and be around all the time. So those guys were available like lunch hours, afternoons, evenings, and on weekends. Well, this new manager decided he wanted to have some full-time people there because he had a big backlog of students that were waiting for instructors, and instructors had limited time and availability. Mm-hmm. So somehow he got permission to hire 2 full-time civilian instructors to be there all the time. So he hired me and 1 other civilian instructor, and he said, welcome aboard, handed me a clipboard with about 30 names on it. And he said, start calling people, take as many as you want.
Oh, wow. And it goes against the rules of new flight instructors. Usually, as you get your first job as a CFI, you get scraps. You're like, well, I'll give you a student. They're in trouble anyway. I don't want to deal with them anyway. So you get maybe 1 or 2 students until more people come in, new clients come in and say, hey, I want to learn how to fly. And then, if you're there, congratulations, you got yourself a student. But man, to get a clipboard and go take as many as you want. Talk about
I had a similar experience to Keith on that. When I got my first instructor job, they had a handful of students that we only had 1 other instructor when I started there.
Oh, wow.
So basically I got handed a sheet just like Keith and said, Here, start making phone calls. Pick who you want.
Yeah, and and it's very interesting to hear your story because I had a conversation very recently, on the flight deck at cruise when we had nothing to do for 5.5 hours, about how we can fix this problem. And it got kind of heated. We were both on the same side of the argument, the captain and I. And we were saying how this debate that is happening right now, whether or not Congress will pass a law to extend the retirement age from 65 to 67, inevitably all it does is kick the can 2 years down the road, and it doesn't solve the problem that we have a huge pilot shortage. Now, the people that I think have a good perspective on what's really going on realize that there is not really a pilot shortage in the sense that the management at these major airlines around the country and around the world could pull resources and hire more and pay more. But even that argument is relatively weak because you can pay us, a little bit more, give us these bonuses to come on to a regional, and you're all you're doing is poaching from one regional airline to another, going, oh man, did you hear that bonus over at Sandpiper? And so maybe someone from like Mesa or SkyWest or who knows, some other airline or regional airline might go, hell, I'm going to go over there because I'm not under any kind of contract. I'm going to go get those bonuses because I have my time. I'm going to flow pretty soon, or I'm going to get a job soon anyway. Again, that doesn't really solve the problem. It's only delaying the inevitable. What we need to do collectively in this industry is to get people who are not already in aviation interested in it. That's part of the reason why I do this podcast, is to explain what we do here when you've made it to the tip of the pyramid and you have that dream job at a legacy carrier and how we got here. That's why I find these stories just so enlightening. And the program that you went through in high school, I mean, Alex and I are sitting here just so impressed, you can see it on our faces, that a high school has a program about aviation and learning how to do performance numbers and flight plans and things like that, which then gets the young student, interested in things like math, science, and STEM, basically. Instead of just throwing a computer or tablet in front of them and going, have fun, this is actually what needs to happen. We need to bring these programs back into our schools at an early age to get people excited that can follow a path that will lead them to a career in aviation. Maybe not an airline career, but a career in aviation nonetheless. That will increase our pool. Unfortunately, that's not a quick fix. That is 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, how are we going to have the fill of our pilots as these other pilots retire? We're going to need to replace them. How do we do that? Well, if the pool is limited, you're going to end up draining it. We need more people to jump in the pool, more youngsters to say, hey, man, airplanes are cool. When's the last time someone came up to the flight deck before the flight and said, oh, Captain, can I bring Johnny up here? And wow. I mean, it happens so rarely. It used to be every flight had a parade of kids coming up just to take a picture with the captain. Keith, when's the last time someone came up to your flight deck?
This last trip.
Did they really?
Dad came up, he had a 2-year-old girl, and wanted to show her the cockpit and everything, and so of course the girl was a little shy, but I had the dad sit in the captain's seat with his daughter, and we took some photos, and it still happens a little bit more now that I think people are traveling more in the summer season. Mm-hmm. It hadn't been happening for a long time, and of course we had no passengers for over a year with flying cargo only flights overseas. So but yeah, and I still hand out the little logbooks and the little wings, and people are glad to receive them.
Yeah, so that's the difference between the other
because
airline,
I feel like
wide body.
If I hand out a pair of wings to some kid, and say you're going to be a pilot one day, start taking your flying lessons. Maybe it happened to me; it could happen to them too.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to hear that, because I think with the domestic routes, especially when you're doing 3 legs in a day and it's go, 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 and you're doing aircraft swaps and you only have 45 minutes or whatever. And, you barely have time to brief your cabin crew prior to departure, let alone have people parade through the flight deck and take pictures and stuff. So to hear that that's still going on, at least on, select flights and the wide body equipment, is actually just superb. And thank you for sharing that. Now, let's get back to your flight experience. And we picked up, or we left off where you were a CFI in a military environment as a civilian. How was that instruction? Was that a benefit to a new CFI to have someone who's like military trained to come in and be more, I don't know, maybe organized and dedicated?
Well, most of the students I had were not military pilots, right? So some of the pilots were instructing, and some of them would come in and get checked out to go take their family out, for example. But I'll tell you, one of the scariest things I ever did was try to check out an F-4 Phantom pilot in a 172. Because some of the military pilots that didn't come from a GA background had minimal time in T-34 or something, and then they put them in a jet right away. So they didn't have much, single engine piston time. And so, checking this guy out in 172, he's coming in at like 100 knots and wondering, hey, how come this plane's not landing? Well, about 40 knots fast. He was afraid to fly less than 100 knots. So, Phantoms don't like to fly very slow. So, I learned about that, pretty quickly. But most of the students were enlisted people, mechanics, or the line kids, or anybody that had a connection to the federal government. So there's like flight service station employees, FAA employees could come and take lessons. I had one student that was one of the tower controllers at Toro. So there was all kinds of people coming through. And one other cool little story is at the Marine and Navy bases, they have a painted, shortened portion of the runway that simulates an aircraft carrier. It's about 300 feet long. And so they have like full arresting cables, and they have the aircraft carrier mirror system for landing that you can play with. And so I had one student who was a college student in the Marine Corps PLC program, which is the PLC is the Marine Corps version of the ROTC.
Okay.
And he was going to go and graduate and go be Marine Corps pilot. So I said, well, okay, you're going to be a Marine pilot, probably flying an F-18. So I'm just going to train you to land on this aircraft carrier deck. And we did all our landings, all our practices. It's an 8,000 foot runway there, but we're using 300 feet of it for our touch and go practice. And he got to the point, he just nailed it. He even did his first solo just on that carrier deck.
Oh, wow.
So, and when somebody doesn't know any better or, any different, and you train them to do something, they pick it up and they do it, and they don't, question. So it was an experience for me that I was able to teach somebody from zero to do that, and said, you're going to do great in the Marines.
Yeah. That's so cool. I've never heard that. And it's just, was it like the first 300 feet or something painted that way, or was it a separate little area?
Painted carrier deck. It has thicker stripes on the side. I wish I had a photo of it somewhere. And it had thicker centerline stripes, but it was off to the left side of the runway.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's like landing on the left half of the runway, basically, for that 300 feet. And so we watch the military guys doing this, because they call it FCLP, Fleet Carrier Landing Practice. And they would have to do this on a routine basis before they would go out to the carrier to qualify for their landings. So you watch them come in and hit that simulated deck and then do their touch and go, which is a very short touch and go, not like we do in a Cessna. They basically hit, add full power, and take off again right away because you only have a 300-foot runway to play with, right? And they got plenty of thrust. So, they hit the carry runway and take off real quick. So it's things to watch. Now, the other thing that was impressive was teaching students how to blend. We think about going to, Orange County, Long Beach, someplace where there's some airline traffic, San Jose, and you're teaching a student. But when you're teaching a student with F4s, A4s, A6s, C-130s, occasional C-141 or a C-5 or something, and teaching them how to cut their base short to come in close behind the first F4, so the second one that's coming around the pattern at 180 knots is going to run you over. And do your touch and go, make a quick left turn, get back on downwind and out of the way so the guy behind you can go, blast through. There was a certain technique of just blending with the traffic pattern that we did. And we got along very well with the air traffic controllers there. And the students did a great job of blending with traffic. And then wake turbulence from C-130s. I had one student on a solo that got a little bit too close behind a C-130, got some wake turbulence, did a go around immediately. Correct choice. No problem. And he said, I got some turbulence on C-130, so I just went around. Great.
Perfect. You could always go around. That's absolutely perfect.
Always go around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a great experience for me and great training for all the students that were going through there.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, I know I forget how many days they update the sectional charts, right? And ever since we went electronic, who keeps track of that kind of stuff? But how is that
So it used to be every 6 months for the sectional charts. They changed it recently to match the terps of every 56 days.
Oh, thank you, Alex. That's great. Every 56 days. I mean, damn, you hit that one on the head. That's great. So every 56 days, you got changes to your sectional charts. How was the airspace back in Southern California back then compared to how it is now? Is it pretty standard or has it changed significantly?
It's changed. So when I was starting to fly, we had the terminal control area, which was the Class B now. And that was pretty much it. We had a VFR corridor over LAX and not much else. There was no Class Charlie airports. They had what was it called?
Was the radar?
Yes, TSRA, something like that.
Yeah.
It was
terminal radar
approach TRSA, terminal radar service area.
Service area. Yeah.
So, and it was advisory in nature and not a requirement. So, they had one, I think, in Ontario and Burbank. Orange County did not have one. So you could use it, you could not use it. It didn't really matter. And then later came the Mode C 30-mile veil after we had a major incident in Southern California here, where a DC-9 collided with a single-engine plane who was squawking, but not squawking altitude apparently. And so the controller got busy and didn't point out that traffic to the airliner. So that gave us the 30
happened
mile.
in Torrance.
That was one in Cerritos.
Okay.
And so that gave us the 30-mile veil of requiring Mode C operations near the Class Bravo airspace.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things have slowly creeped along and increased the complexity of the airspace, right? So, and of course, as usual in aviation, it's due to some fatal accident that created this. We got terminal control areas and Class Bravo after the PSA accident in San Diego that kind of created that. Because again, a single engine plane got in the way of the airliner and caused a crash. So they decided that, everybody needed to be controlled and separated by the controllers in the airspace. And, it's a good idea, because at the time that we didn't have the technology, that we have today. So that was the best way of doing it. So yes, the airspace has changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
But when you're learning to fly, you learn to fly with this airspace, and it's not really that big an issue.
It's kind of like when you learn to land on a 10,000-foot runway, and then you say, well, today we're going to land on that 300-foot strip, and you get really good at it. Then the 10,000-foot runway looks like an antiquated, field in the middle of nowhere. And it's the same with the airspace, I think, is that, because I can remember, back 15, 20 years ago, whenever I was doing any kind of GA flying, going into Southern California was like something that you really had to prepare for, because you're talking to SoCal under positive identification and squawking and altitude alerting, or altitude squawk, and then you're told, all right, we radar contact, fly this heading, intercept the 360 from the Santa Monica VOR, fly it outbound, climb, maintain 4,500 feet, and intercept this radial, and then fly that westbound. And you're like, wait, I'm sorry, a student pilot? What? It could be very intimidating. So, but I can imagine back then, maybe the airspace wasn't as busy, as restrictive, and flying a VFR corridor was not even a thing. And then as we've developed over the years, the FARs, I know that they use black ink in there, but really, it's all been written in blood, and every rule is there usually as a result to some kind of major accident. So yeah, thank you for sharing that wonderful insight about the airspace.
There was another rule, which I think is still in effect, that student pilots are not allowed at a Class Bravo airport. Right. It's a restriction. No? Yes?
With an endorsement.
Okay.
Oh yes, you can have a Class Bravo endorsement, right?
So, but I used to take commercial students and make a landing at LAX, because you have to be able to blend with the traffic, and 120 knots till short final, and I used to my job after instructing in El Toro was 135 little cargo operation that we had. And I was flying an A36 Bonanza 5 days a week between LAX and Las Vegas for a feeder contract to Airborne Express. So I'd be flying a Bonanza every day in and out of LAX. Wasn't too uncommon at the time either.
Yeah.
I think my dad was doing not the Bonanza feeder to Vegas, but he was doing at some point gold and silver running out of the Vegas mines out of a Bonanza in the Southern California area. And it was, interesting to say the least.
Wow. Well, so I did the Bonanza cargo run for a while. Then I moved up to a twin Cessna 401 that they were running, also a cargo run from Los Angeles that would stop in Santa Barbara and then Santa Maria and come back each day. And, and of course, you sit around all day where you're going, and then wait around until you have to return. So one day I was on that one in Santa Maria, and the Airborne Express delivery driver that I was friendly with said, hey, why don't you just ride along with me for the day and go around my route? Well, his route included going to Vandenberg Air Force Base and doing a lot of deliveries there. And so we went and drove around Vandenberg Air Force Base, and this was 1982. And he said, well, they built this new space shuttle launch complex over here. You want to go see it? And, well, yeah, because at the time, NASA had planned to launch space shuttles from Florida and from the West Coast. And so they built an exact duplicate of their, launch complex 39A, whatever, in Florida. And they built the same thing in Vandenberg that was never used. But he drove up and he waved to the guard because it's not being used. Nobody's there. Nobody's doing anything. We drove right up to the pad. You look up at the launch site there, and all the concrete, deflectors where the exhaust comes out when they're launching and everything. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. See, it's jobs like this that you get when I hear all the time from say the older generation of pilots that just don't exist today. Like doing these little cargo runs, doing, flying bank checks, which that's non-existent anymore.
Right.
That like
photograph negatives.
For us.
They used to fly film negatives around to get processed.
Yes. Like these jobs don't exist for the new gen, like people like me. I either have to get an instructing job and work my way up to where I am now, or I get lucky and start making connections like the office manager at my old flight school who got a right seat gig out of a Falcon 90 at like 400 hours.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen.
Right.
So
that's the good thing and the bad thing about today's pipeline, if you will, is, it's a more streamlined to the airline cockpit, which was our goal as well. Just we didn't have the pipeline. You took this job and then, okay, you can fly a twin here and okay, you can fly a turboprop here, and step by step, which was kind of haphazard, but you've eventually made it to the major. And today, you can do it a lot faster. So I went from soloing at 16 to the major at 26. Now, to me, that was a 10-year span. As far as the flight training goes, today you can do that in 3 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was a question I wanted to ask you is, how long did you flight instruct? I mean, at that time, I remember it was to get
about
a job.
A year and a half.
A year and a half. That's
wow.
That's not actually that long.
That's not that
from
bad.
Like January of 81 till summer of 82 when I started that Bonanza job.
But as you're mentioning, that's the nexus that's changed, because now in this day and age, you can go from flight instructor into a regional airline. That's the next step, because the days of flying gold and silver and checks and banks and all that stuff and newspapers, those days are over.
And
so
you're going straight from pistons to jets without in the turboprop step, which most of us went through a turboprop job at some point before the majors will look at you, because traditionally in those years they were taking like 80% military people and 20% civilian people. But by the time I got around to it, the airlines were expanding again, like they are today. We're hiring a lot of people in a short amount of time across all the airlines. So it was about an 80% civilian, 20% military mix, because the guys couldn't get out of the military fast enough to take the jobs.
Yeah.
So and that's what I feel I kind of lack is I wish that the generations now we could go in from something in between the CFI realm into, a single piston or a piston twin into something a little bit more advanced. I'm not saying go completely into, into a jet, but like, a turboprop, a King Air, doing something like that, and then go into the airlines, because the fire hose, when you're in here and you're getting into that jet world, going from I'm flying a 160 horsepower 172 around to now I'm flying a jet that has 13,000 pounds of thrust out of each engine. It's a big jump.
It is, but if you're landing on a 300-foot strip as the standard, your skill level just happens to go there.
Yeah. So then very quickly, in 1983, I was having 3 jobs. I was doing that twin Cessna cargo run. And then because once I had a 135 qualification letter in 400 Cessnas, you're qualified in all the 400 Cessnas. So I started applying around to other 400 Cessna operators, and I ended up at Air Nevada out of McCann Airport in Las Vegas, flying the Grand Canyon tours.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a really super fun job. And I did that for the summer. And then I got to, because I had another friend that was there already at Pacific Coast Airlines in Santa Barbara, California. They were flying the older Handley Page Jetstreams, which were from the 1960s, but the predecessor to the Jetstream 31 and Super 31, whatever, they had later. And so I flew that for about a year and a half, from the fall of 83 until spring of 85, when I got picked up by the major. So when I mentioned that last class I had at San Jose State, where they said to research a graduate program, they also had us write a paper on what we thought we would be doing in 5 years after graduation. And we all had put that we would be airline pilots in 5 years after graduation in 1980. And the department chairman said, guys, all the airlines have people on furlough, maybe look another job, air traffic control, or working for, Lockheed or one of the aircraft manufacturers, somebody, because, this flying thing isn't really going to, pan out for you guys. Well, we didn't pay attention to that. We all just kept flying, and then we all got hired at the majors in 5 years after graduating. So with getting all my other ratings and experience and my master's and everything else along the way, was quite and getting hired at 26. How many people are getting hired at 26 at the airline? Some people hired at 25, 24 even. So
yeah,
it was possible. Then we're flying 727 engineer. I did three flight schools my first year. I did 727 engineer, DC-10 engineer, and then back to 727 FO in my first year because things were moving so fast.
So that time as a flight engineer, is that? And I always enjoy hearing stories.
We didn't have the lock-ins or minimum time in seat requirement, anything like that. You did whatever you wanted, transfer wherever you wanted. And in those days, you transferred, and then you kind of negotiated with the manning department what seat you were going to take. So that, if they have room for you at the base, then you say, okay, well, let's see what seat are we going to put you in.
Wow.
So that was a little bit of a negotiation too. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the diversity aspect of all this stuff, because the diversity is a big thing today.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to get people that aren't normally thought of as pilots to get in piloting. But in my experience, I always had diversity in my career. One of my instructors early on for my instrument rating out of John Wayne was a wonderful female instructor I had, which I didn't have very long because she had 500 hours and got sucked up by United Airlines really fast. But I had her for a little while, and it was great. And then we had a lot of the female pilots at Air Nevada doing the Grand Canyon tour. And then when I got to Pacific Coast Airlines and the Jetstream, my initial IOE check pilot when I was brand new FO there was a female who took me on my IOE. Mm-hmm. So all these things, I never really thought anything about it because I was, that's just who was there.
Right.
And recently, there was at our airline, there was a big thing about the Black History Month and Black history of aviation. Mm-hmm. And mentioned about Captain David Harris, the first Black airline pilot that was hired. And as it turned out, when I was doing my 727 flight engineer IOE at age 26, I flew a 3-day trip with him and my check airman, flight engineer check airman. So, and the last day of my trip, the check airman signed me off for, going on my own. And so I flew 2 legs with Captain Harris as my captain. And I thought, okay, well, Captain Harris, great, whatever. And, it didn't strike me. Nobody mentioned he was the first, Black pilot hired at a major airline. Nobody mentioned it. He's just Captain Harris. And he's a great guy. And that was, 37 years ago.
Yeah. I think when you're living in the industry and you're coming up and growing up in it, because at 24, 26 years old, you're still growing up in it. And you see this, and this is the norm. And I feel the same way. It's like I never really thought anything about it. And then all of a sudden it becomes this big deal, and you have this, we got to have more of this. And yeah, I agree to all of that. But I don't think we see it as that humility, I think, amongst pilots when it comes to who you're flying with. If you got the skills, nobody cares what color the skin you have or what your background or your religious belief. I mean, there's a couple things that we joke around about we don't talk about on the flight deck, right? Guns, religion, and politics. Those three things are off the table because you don't want to have a heated debate with the person next to you while you're trying to fly an aircraft. But all kidding aside, it's so interesting to hear that back then it was not a big deal. Now we look back and we think, wow, that was a big deal. And we make a big deal out of it. And this whole diversity inclusion, I'm all for it. I think sometimes the companies blow it a little bit out of proportion in order to make themselves look good in this whole woke movement, Me Too movement. And the fact is, we all eat the same, sleep the same, and you know what else. So it's so cool that you had that experience and that background. But what are your thoughts? Do you agree that sometimes the companies make it a bigger deal than really it needs to be, or do you think that it's great and we should be pushing more of it?
Well, it is great. I'm not sure about pushing more of it, but certainly there needs to be more of the what the political term is, underrepresented people, and getting into the industry. And I think, in the past, there's been very low percentages of women and other minorities, but
yeah.
I introduced you to one of my very dear pilot friends when we saw last, the Asian fella.
Yeah.
One of the best pilots I know. And everybody's everywhere. Now, why there's not more of one or another, some of that could be cultural on their end. I don't really know. There's certainly people looked at me kind of oddly, coming from the Jewish community as being a pilot, and said, "What? You're not a doctor. You're not a lawyer. You're not this. You're not that." So, what are you doing flying? And so, well, that's what I like. And fortunately, there wasn't a roadblock in any way, but I just was doing the same thing everybody else that was getting into flying was doing.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to have you guys have a perspective, because in general, because I know you're trying to talk about people's journey as they're beginning their airline career, but I wanted to just bring a little perspective on old guy that's finishing up and what it's been like, historically,
yeah,
along the way and the way things were done. Now, the other thing you mentioned, we want to talk a little about some of the changes in the airline, and I mentioned that in a particular TCAS and EGPWS have been the two biggest changes that I've seen at the airline, as well as GPS navigation. We used to use
the LORAN
LORAN-based navigation for long range flying, and it was radio based, and atmospheric conditions and propagation and being what they were. It was a interesting way of navigating because the circle of where the box thought you were is a lot larger than what a GPS box thinks you are, right? And we'd have two of these Omega navigation. LORAN was used in GA and Omega was used at the airlines. So that Omega navigation, we had two boxes. I flew on the DC-10, and one might say that you're left of course, one might say you're right of course, and so you kind of fly in the middle. And if it didn't know where it was, you get what was known as an ambiguity amber light that would come on, and we would always joke about the most feared dual ambiguity light, where both your boxes didn't know where they were.
Oh,
so very rare, but under certain atmospheric conditions, it can occur. And then you're kind of just wagging your way across to Hawaii from the West Coast. We don't worry about so much coming back because you can always find the West Coast, even if you're a few hundred miles off. But
Yeah,
if
you'll
you miss
hit
Hawaii.
You'll hit land.
Not a good picture.
Yeah, and we'll be right back right after a few words from our sponsors. And now back to the show.
I can say that obviously all that stuff of like GPS and everything has hit into the GA community as well, and it's changed it dramatically in there. When I started flying back in 2005, when I got my private pilot's license, I was in a Cessna 152 with a single comm, single nav radio. And I navigated perfectly fine on paper charts and was able to get from Carlsbad, California to Banning and back completely unscathed. Those planes at that flight school that I was at have all been since upgraded to the the 750 Garmin 750 touchscreen GPS single comm, and I'm like, you're spoiling these kids. Like the whole point of having that 152 was to teach you how to navigate and be completely fine on your own out in the middle of nowhere with a VOR, one VOR, and that's it. Like, if you can't get yourself unlost out of that by, climbing and circling and doing all the proper procedures, the what do we call them now? The children of the magenta line.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And it's even evident when you're seeing it in some of the training that we're doing here. They always mention it that don't just rely on the box, figure out where you're at and how to kind of keep situationally aware so that you don't get yourself lost, that you don't, have ambiguity come up and you don't know where you are to do that. But the planes nowadays, at least in the 175, it won't ever get lost.
Yeah, and
you shouldn't rely on it.
Yeah, you were mentioning the children of the magenta line. In 1997, there was an American Airlines captain, Warren Vanderberg, who he said that the industry has turned pilots into children of the magenta line, meaning that we're so dependent upon automation that when it comes down to piloting skills, that's becoming weaker and weaker with the advent of technology. Why do you need to look out the window? You have TCAS. Why do you need to worry about, where I am? People ask all the time. Flight attendants will call, ding, a passenger wants to know, where are we? What are we over? And both pilots will always look at each other going, let me look at my navigation screen. We're 130 miles east of Nashville. Yeah, what's this lake under us? Okay. And then occasionally I'll fly with a really old timer that goes, hold on, I got myself my trusty Captain Atlas. Let me pull this out. They pull out this giant laminated chart and they'll look and they'll go, oh yeah, that's Lake so-and-so will be gone. Who knows? But it's so rare. And unfortunately it's part of, as we get the technology advancing, the accuracy of what we do, the efficiency of what we do gets better, but then we get complacent and we forget about those things. That my instructor back in the 90s was saying, yeah, we're going to turn off that GPS. Click. And he'd turn it off. And I'd sit there and I'd have to navigate, sometimes under the hood, depending on what lesson we were on. And I'd have to figure out NDBs and ADFs and VORs. And they're like, where are you? And show me on the chart, but don't look up. That was the way I was taught. I mean, that's just not something that maybe you'll do that once in a lesson, one time. But it's not something we do.
Anybody ever do single VOR holding?
Yeah, there you go.
No, didn't ever do that, thank God. But our flight school that I worked for before I came to Sandpiper, the most technologically advanced airplane that we had was the one that I took Tony up in.
Oh.
I mean, let me rephrase that. Our multi was a G1000 suited airplane, right? But that's obviously for advanced students. Mm-hmm. But the one that I took you up in, that was our most advanced airplane.
And
what did it have?
2, yeah. 6-pack, NAV 2 package. Yep.
6-pack NAV 2 package and a DME. That's it. right? Because our chief pilot believed in still flying the traditional ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the problem with some of these flight farms, pilot farms, where you go and they're like, oh, we have all was it SR-22 airplanes with the G2, 3000, 4000, who knows what they're up to now, and it's all glass, just like it is at the airlines. And you're like, hey, this is great. And then you get your pilot certificate, and here you are with your temporary, and you're like, I'm going to rent an airplane, but I can't afford that one. So I'm going to go pick out that 152 and take my family. We're going to go, or, my brother, my sister, something, and we're going to go get a $500 hamburger over in Tucson. And then you get in the airplane, you're freshly minted. Here you go. And now you're looking at a bunch of steam gauges going, wow. And your scan's not there because you had a stare at the glass.
Well, and they talked about at one point, and I don't know why they ever didn't implement this, of having a separate instrument rating for a 6-pack versus a glass paneled airplane.
Well, I always thought that it should be to get your private, it should be on the traditional 6-pack, and then you need an endorsement once you master that you can do the glass cockpit scans and
like you're talking like, oh, we'll get a complex endorsement or a high performance endorsement,
glass endorsement,
G1000 or a glass cockpit endorsement.
Yep,
that's actually you know what, we need to somehow figure a way to get that to the FAA.
I've been saying that since 2004, actually, and then my DEs and my POIs that I've worked with at the flight school there in Arizona, they all agreed with me. They're like, yeah, we agree, because the G1000 was brand new, and we actually had a class that you could take, and I taught a couple classes about how to use the G1000 and for private pilot GA stuff. And I always say, I'm like, hey, this is going to be tough when every airplane has this, and the flight school is going to sell it like, hey, this is what the airlines do, and people are going to flock to it and get a certificate, and then they go, well, I just got my instrument rating, and they borrow their buddies, say, Bonanza, and they're trying to do IFR down to somewhere that's IMC, and it's not going to end well.
Well, I've talked to kids. I say kids loosely, I know, but I talked to kids in training that they're going, I don't know what I'd do if I ever got into a traditional airplane. I've flown. They went to a puppy mill of a flight school and started on a G1000 from the day they started to the day they finished. Mm. I had a student of mine. She was a CFI candidate, and she flew up in Washington at one of the puppy mill schools, and glass cockpits. And she came to our flight school because she moved back down to Southern California and hadn't ever in her entire 300 hours touched a 6-pack airplane.
Whoa.
So it was a hard transition for her because she didn't know what she was looking at.
Yeah, definitely things to think about for your training if you're thinking about getting out there and getting some training done. I've always said it, start simple and work your way up to the complex. The Children of Magenta, I'll put a link in the show notes. It's a pretty interesting video. It's a little dated, but it's out there on the YouTubes for everyone to enjoy.
It still holds true to this day, though. That's the thing, is it doesn't matter if it's, from 97, it still talks true about, the Magenta line and how we're still doing that to this day.
Yeah.
Very How about uncontrolled airports?
Oh God, don't get me started. That's where I started.
Well, and that's fun too, because over when I was at Sandpiper, there were at least a dozen airports that we would fly into regularly that after a certain hour, the tower would close and they would go to an uncontrolled airport. And occasionally you'd get a company-wide email saying, do not land at an uncontrolled airport without communicating on CTAF, and if you need to review how that works, look at your AOM page so-and-so and subsection this and review the procedure. And we actually, I think I've told the story before on the podcast where one of my favorite layovers at Sandpiper was Manhattan, Kansas, because it's a college town. It's, it was at Kansas State right there. And if I'm remembering that correctly and saying that right, but it was a great little town. And the tower would have very limited hours, and there were flight crews that were leaving on that 6 a.m. departure, and they would taxi out, and they would sometimes not announce that they were taxiing out, or sometimes they would neglect to turn on the pilot-controlled automated airport lighting, which is a violation. You cannot taxi at an airport without the the lighting. And if the lighting is not working and it's uncontrolled, guess what? Now you can't land there. There are other procedures that we had, like if you didn't get the weather before landing, that's another violation. You needed to have the weather. And if the weather, for whatever reason, the AWOS or the ASOS was not working, you were to call the operations, and the operations would, it's a kid working the ramp, whatever, would look outside and go, it looks pretty clear to me. And then, okay, now you're legal to land. And we get an email saying, you have to do all these things because we're so used to getting in our routine, landing at a Class Bravo or Class Charlie airport on a regular basis. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I haven't landed at an uncontrolled airport in 2 or 3 years. And now you're like, what are we supposed to do again? And you're looking at the other guy, hoping they know. So Keith, you started at Legacy Airlines in, was it 1985?
85, yeah.
Yeah, and a couple of years as a flight engineer. Was everyone always selected to start out?
9 months.
Oh, 9 months. So was that like everybody always started as an engineer, or
yeah, everybody started as an engineer.
Yeah, so that was just, you had to do your time.
And there was what we used to call the two-stripers. There was professional flight engineers who were only flight engineers. Some of them weren't even pilot rated.
Oh.
And they had a separate union, and they had no retirement age. So I'd be flying around with guys, some of them in their 70s, as the flight engineer.
Wow.
So, when we talk about retirement age, it's relative. A lot of flight attendants that are over 65, shall we say, and
smart man.
They don't have retirement age. So, but the retirement, somebody decided at the dawn of the jet age that it was going to be 60, and then somebody decided it was going to be 65. Now they're talking around. So it's an arbitrary thing that some government agency decided on, and it's whether that's a valid way to look at it or not. I'm not gonna go one way or the other on that.
Yeah.
But the flight engineer thing, we started as flight engineers, but we were always junior to these two-stripe professional flight engineers because they were always, the most senior people. So you really can never hold a good trip because those guys were at the top of the seniority list, and there was a lot of them. And so my strategy was to get out of that flight engineer seat as fast as I could. So I did basically 2 months. I did 2 months as a 727 flight engineer in New York. Then I got a bid to DC-10 flight engineer in New York. And I did that for a couple of months. And then I transferred, believe it or not, to San Diego when it was a standalone crew base. I put in for San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, just to get back to California. San Diego popped in first. I went back to 727 flight engineer in San Diego for another 4 or 5 months. Then I got 727 engineer after like 9 months with the company. So 727 FO. And so things are moving fast. There was people that had been in San Diego, had been flight engineer for like 12 years.
Oh, wow.
Because through furloughs and no movement, kind of like things were in the early 2000s here. And some of those guys could go directly from a flight engineer and bid a captaincy right there. But they hadn't touched an airplane in all that time, 12 years, some of them. So the airline put in a restriction that, okay, they could bid captain, but they would have to fly FO for 6 months before they let them go be captain.
Yeah. So,
yeah, it was an interesting time. Plus, it was all the B scale. We're all hired as B scale. All the captains were A scale. And we'd have, FO and engineer as B scale and A scale captain. And there was some discussion about the validity of the B scale concept, and their approach was nobody twisted the arm to take this job, and what the deal was.
Right.
But that's another no discussion. And unfortunately, B-scale evaporated after a couple of contracts after I got hired. So,
yeah. Now let's unpack one thing for the listeners there that maybe kind of know or heard the term flight engineer but don't understand the concept. What did a flight engineer do on the flight deck?
Basic job of the flight engineer was to pour coffee for the captain and first officer. Beyond that, you ran the air conditioning, pressurization, the fuel system, hydraulic system, electrical system, and there was a whole Christmas tree of lights on the flight engineer panel, which has since all become automated, so that you start the APU and the APU takes over the bus, and you got power. It didn't used to be that way. And on 727, you start the APU, and there was a flashing light, and you had to sync the flashing light to the generator, and then you had to trip the electrical switch on the APU at the right moment when the light was blinking the right way, or you'd fry the electrical system.
Wow.
So it was a human relay.
Yeah.
We used to joke that when you lost power, electrical power on the 727, there was what they called the essential bus, which is kind of like a battery bus or the one of the backup systems that we have on modern airplanes. And the first thing that the captain would call for in that case, first thing on checklist is check essential. Meaning check the essential bus and make sure that you've transferred power from the APU or one of the other power sources to get everything powered. So that used to be our running joke. We just go through the terminal and say to each other, check essential. It's reference to the 727.
Yeah, we often take for granted the fact that computers and automation has really taken over the accuracy and the job of the flight engineer. You joked the first thing I asked you was, what did you do? And you said to pour coffee. But all joking aside, that job was a very technical job. You had to sit there and monitor. When you said the pressurization system, you didn't just push a button and everything gets pressure. Every movement of those thrust levers that the captain or the first officer would make while they're flying would then adjust the flow going through the packs. And unless you wanted your ears to be constantly hurting in pain because of the pressurization fluctuations, the flight engineer had to kind of keep one eye on the thrust lever quadrant and the other eye on the knob on the panel to adjust the flow rate so that the pressurization maintained a constant. And this is a very technical thing that, we joke around that we have glass cockpits and that's all automated, and all we do is drink coffee and read newspapers and talk about work. But the truth is, there was a time when nobody got time for that. It was all constant adjustment, constant tweaks, like you said with the APU. If you switched it over on the wrong cycle or the wrong phase, game over.
I'm not even going to tell you how easy it is for us at all.
The real main thing was the fuel system, because if you got the fuel system out of balance and with the lateral limits of the fuel balance, that was a big problem. And some people would, not run the center tank at the right time, or not cross-feed at the right time, or cross-feed too much or something, and you have a problem. And then the other thing was, if you had an issue with some passenger or something in the back, the captain always turns around and says, "Hey, Keith, go see what's going on back there."
Oh. Put your hat on.
Put your head on first. That's right. Yeah. And then, so you go and we would go and address the passenger situation. That's before, don't go back to the cabin or anything. But we were the first line of defense. So if the flight attendant couldn't handle something, then flight engineer would go, and you could say something to the passenger like, "Well, don't let me go get the captain." You just do what they're asking you. So usually that's the first stop, and was the flight engineer, and that usually took care of most of the problems.
Yeah. Different time. Time.
We have it spoiled now in the airplanes that we're in comparison to all this. Like for us to turn on the APU, like if you look above on the panel up me and get everything going, it's literally I click the APU switch, turn it to on the run, the buses take over, and there's a button over here that you got to make sure is in. And once the APU's on, it transfers the load automatically to the APU. Don't have to worry about that. Fuel balancing is non-existent. Only thing we ever have to worry about is making sure that the tanks are not running dry.
Yeah.
Makes
just monitoring
all this automation.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Keith, you have a pretty good career now at Legacy. And how many years do you have left?
Slightly over 1 year.
Oh my gosh, that just doesn't seem real. It's so little time. Are there any things that you wanted to accomplish in this time that you have left that you haven't yet?
Well, there's some new destinations that they put on our map that I'd like to get to before time's up. And some of the ones that they've dropped, like the Asia and Australia and things like that, that I'd like to get back to before time's up. But yeah, as mostly just the new places that I like to get to.
Yeah. Now, I've asked a few captains now ever since this article came out a couple weeks ago about this H-67. And the question is, if they change it, will you stay?
That's a tough question. I don't know. Half of me, well, I had the same dilemma with the when it went from age 60 to 65, right? Because when we were all hired, we were intending and fully expected to retire at 60. Then they changed it to 65, and they said, well, now if you retire at 60, that's considered early retirement, and you don't get all your full benefits. So then, unless they offered a early out or some other kind of package, we're all kind of staying till 65 now. At 67, I don't know if that's going to be an expectation or an option. So I'm ready to find something else to do at 65. And I know there's a few people that would like my seat. So, get out of here. So I'm fully cognizant of the pyramid or the ladder, whatever you want to call it, and people's expectations of moving up. So, I was kept off the 777 for a while because of people staying beyond 60, and so, well, okay, all right, have to wait a little bit longer, and I don't want to be an impediment to somebody else's career.
Yeah.
So, I'm planning on finding something else to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I know it's a kind of a debated question that people are still kind of trying to figure out what's going to happen and what are the rules. Now, Alex, I know you got to go. You have some more training to accomplish here. And so we wish you luck on that. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me, Keith. It was wonderful to meet you, and can't wait to hear the rest of your story on the podcast.
Bye, Alex, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, guys. Take it easy, Tony. I'll talk to you later.
All right. See you.
Bye.
Now, Keith, a couple more things I wanted to talk about before we get too far into the Q&A. One was the long haul flying. Now, everyone always says, what's your goal? Oh, maybe I'll do international long haul before I retire or something. I've had people tell me, no, you should do it now while you're an FO. That way you can kind of enjoy yourself, and you'll fly only a minimal schedule, and you get maximum hours, and you'll see all these destinations. And what are your thoughts on that? Is that something that is a lot? I mean, I've heard the how it's two different airlines. There's the domestic narrow body airline, and then the wide body is the airline side that really gets treated well. Is that true?
Well, you see it a little bit on the international side, flying the Hawaii, or you're flying Central America, the Caribbean, whatever. Because that's basically, we were flying DC-10 to Hawaii, and that was an international division for us. I don't know. What are your thoughts on what you've seen between flying the lower 48 and Hawaii?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, and some pilots get used to these, 2 or 3 legs. You're only sitting in the seat for a couple hours. You get to get up, stretch, change aircraft, and they're kind of used to that. And they can be home like more often in terms of like only gone for 2 days and then they're home, or and that aspect, and they're within the states, so they know what to expect. They don't have to deal with foreign languages and all that kind of stuff. And what procedures do I need to do when I'm flying into Lima or Mexico City or wherever? Um, and with the long haul, you're doing one leg usually a day, and you're on that seat for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours. Who knows, even 12, 14 hours if you're doing like Sydney or something. And you have to take the breaks, and then you're on the backside of these clocks, and their circadian rhythm is all off. But it's pros and cons. You're dealing with foreign languages and foreign controllers, but then at the same time, you get there and they see your uniform and they treat you like you mean something, like you're royalty, which is nice to have that respect. That, hey, I just flew an airplane over an ocean, and yeah, I was responsible or partly responsible as a first officer for the lives of hundreds of people. Yeah, thank you very much for looking at me and appreciating what I do and opening doors for me. That's amazing. It's not required, but it's amazing. So I'm torn between the two. I'm not afraid of the extra legwork that a pilot has to do in terms of what forms might need to be filled out and what are the procedures, because I'm always learning, and I love that. I constantly want to be learning. I have that mind that needs to be challenged. I don't want to get in the routine of doing the same 5 layovers for years. Um, so I look forward to possibly having that opportunity for long haul flying. But I mean, is that an accurate idea of what's involved?
Yeah, the main thing is the circadian rhythm part of it, and whether you're what I call a good airplane sleeper. I've been since a little kid a really good airplane sleeper. So I get on the plane, I go to sleep. Some people cannot sleep on an airplane for whatever reason, and they don't last very long, I want to say. I've seen people come over and then spend whatever minimum time they're required to be there and then go back to narrow body domestic, and that's fine. I was loving just flying to Hawaii, and I always thought I'd go fly international for a couple of years and then come back to flying the Hawaii stuff and finish my career just flying Hawaii, because that was really my favorite trip to do.
Mm-hmm.
And but I'm 9.5 years on the 777 now, and still fun, still exciting, still going to new places. So and I'm a good airplane sleeper, so it's still fun.
Yeah. And
so I think everybody should experience it for some span of time. And then see, the other thing is a lot of the people that came from the military did a lot of international flying when they were in the military. So they did that when they were in their 20s, and they can take it or leave it. People like me didn't have that opportunity early on. So now is my time to experience that. So, that's why I'm doing it now.
Yeah.
A lot of people have done it for a while and then finish their career on narrow body, and that's fine. That's their choice. They're probably home a little bit more with shorter trips. Although now you have 4 or 5 day trips. So I don't know. Most of my trips are 3 days with this occasional 6-day trip thrown in, but that's like 2-3 day trips. So you're not really working more days per calendar month. You're just, maybe a week on, a week off if you're doing that. Versus say 2 on, 3 off, or something like a narrow body schedule would be maybe a better schedule.
Yeah.
But the operational aspect of that is what's the interesting, because now you have more ETOPS, more drift downs. We have depressurization clouds over a lot more places around the world. There's more things to take into account. And now there's vaccination requirements or isolation requirements. Some places were not allowed off the hotel property. So, there's some different restrictions depending on where you're going. So and they're changing every week. So it's definitely a moving target.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get those emails all the time. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. I just saw that another destination just lifted their vaccine mandate. That they had a mandate that if you were not vaccinated as a crew member, you could not fly there. So, I mean, it's tough. You got to keep track of all this. If you know what you're flying for the month, great. But if you're on reserve on a wide body right now, it's a lot of work because if you get assigned a trip, now you got to go and look to see what the requirements are. And you would think that crew scheduling would be on that, but you have to make sure that you're good to go. You don't want to have any surprises when you get there.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when we first met, one of the things you told me was, "Hey, when are you coming over to the triple?" And I was like, "Whoa, I don't know." So yeah, I really appreciate you spending the time with me, both here on the podcast and social media and whatnot. That we've been going back and forth about giving me some pointers on what's involved. What's probably the most challenging aspect, do you think, for a pilot that's just new to the whole long haul thing?
Well, the most challenging is the circadian rhythm part of it.
Sleep.
Because the second co-pilot is always on the first rest break, which is always the hardest because that's at the beginning of the trip, right after takeoff. You got your adrenaline going from getting the trip ready to go, and all the takeoff procedures, figuring out the rest breaks, and then you're going on break right away. And generally, that's at a normal time. East Coast departures are late afternoon, early evening. Normally, West Coast departures are also afternoon, early evening. So you're on a break for 2 to 3 hours at 5 or 6 in the afternoon, and so then you're back after those 2 or 3 hours. And then you have to stay up for the next 6.
Yeah.
On an overnight flight. And be fresh when you land there. Of course, you're not doing the landing, but you have to keep up with everything. So that's probably the hardest job. And those guys get fewer landings if they are flying that second co-pilot job frequently. So you have to go down to the simulator every 90 days to get your 3 landings.
Yeah.
So they try to. Well, it comes into 2 groups. One group tries to fly right seat regularly so that they get enough landings in so they don't have to go to the simulator. Mm-hmm. The other half doesn't want to get landings, so they do have to go down to the simulator.
Yeah, some paid,
because that involves usually getting removed from a trip to go do that.
Yeah.
So I try to accommodate both groups to the extent possible. Mm-hmm. My last trip, I had a new first officer, about 100 hours in the airplane, and he's what I call a short timer because he got released from his commitment, and he's going next month to Airbus captain school.
Oh,
so he's in a strange position, having had just recently come from Airbus FO to 777 FO, and I was going with a short stay to Airbus captain.
Yeah.
And low time, 100 hours, not too many landings. And so, I always offer the leg to the first officer because I know what it was like when I was first officer and captain said, I'll take this first leg and I'll do this and I'll do that. So I always defer to, whatever the first officer wants. So the first officer flew the first leg, and then we're coming back from London back to Los Angeles, and I said, well, you're going to captain school here pretty soon. You want to fly again? Said, yeah, that'd be great. So,
cool.
He flew again.
Yeah.
So I tell him, I got plenty of landings, and I don't need landings. I'm in good shape. So, guy wants landings, he needs load time on the airplane. Whether or not he's, leaving the airplane shortly or not, I just let new people fly as much as they want to. Some want to fly, some want to observe. So, especially if they're going to a new destination or something.
Yeah.
So that's the hardest. The rest of it, the easiest is with a 4-pilot crew on the flights over 12 hours. We get 4 pilots. And then we have an ultra long haul agreement that if we're on a flight over 16 hours, that it's a second captain and 2 first officers. So it's still 4, but now you replace one of the first officers with another captain. But on the 4 crew flight, it's a little bit easier because it's like a double crew. So instead of rotating around seat positions, it's one crew in, one crew on break.
I gotcha.
And then you swap. So you get a little bit more rest break that way. On the longest flights, 16-hour flight, each crew, each pair gets 2 4-hour rest breaks. So it's a lot of resting. Again, if you don't sleep well on the plane, it's hard to be going 10 12 14 hours really without getting any reasonable sleep.
Right. Yeah, you got to be able to sleep in shifts. If you need 8 hours uninterrupted sleep to function, being a pilot's not a good idea. Yeah.
And then returning from Europe, it's a morning departure, sometimes a 9 a.m. departure out of Europe, which is 9 hours ahead of us here in the West Coast. So 9 a.m. departure is midnight, body time for us, and then add on to that, hour before pickup, wake up call, maybe an hour, 45 minutes to an hour travel time to get to the airport. So now you're looking at 10:30, 11 p.m., body clock wake up time to start your trip. So in that case, the first guy on break it has a bit of an advantage because it's sleeping during your normal rest break. So you try to sleep or take the break that is closest to your home body time. When I'm going over to Europe, I tend to take the last rest break because it's like normal sleep time on the West Coast. So, it's easier on the body that way. So you have a little strategy and you figure out pretty quickly. If you're going like to South America, there's not that much of a drastic time shift. So, and you're going to Northern South America, so you see that. It's just a matter of on those flights, they're all night trips both directions. So again, it's just a matter of being able to sleep. On your break, and of course, there's a lot more turbulence and storms and deviations and difficult communications in South America. So there's a lot more to deal with.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's the circadian rhythm aspect of it. I think is something that we have a challenge with even here, on the domestic or the narrow body side. That's always like the biggest complaint is anytime the schedule messes with your circadian rhythm as a pilot, the first thing you're going to do is complaining about your schedule. What you're really complaining about is the fact that you're not going to bed at a certain time that you're accustomed to, that you would prefer to go to bed to, and it's going to mess you all up. So, yeah. Now, let's shift gears for a minute if we can. I wanted to talk about your podcast. The fact that when we met, you're like, yeah, I'm a podcaster too. I started looking at, you've been podcasting quite a while. How did that get started?
In 2007.
In 2007. And what made you decide to, just because your background in music, that you decided you were going to start interviewing?
Yeah, our music, we've been doing the traditional what we call the klezmer music for a number of years, and we were going for a week each summer to klezmer and Eastern European cultural camp in Canada for a few summers, and we take the kids, and the kids had a good time, and they have all kinds of programs for them as well. But we were taking lessons in this music style from all the best practitioners of this style that came from all around the world to teach workshops on this. Mm-hmm. And these people were all so talented, and they'd gone to music conservatory, and they're excellent musicians, whatever genre they're doing. And after a few years of doing this, I thought, well, nobody really knows about these people. If you go to a concert, let's say you go to I don't know, Lady Gaga concert, right? So you see Lady Gaga and you go home. You don't know anything really about her, right? But if you were taking lessons from Lady Gaga, you'd know a lot more about her approach to music, right?
Yeah.
So when you're taking lessons from these people and learning their repertoire and their style, you get a huge insight into their approach to the music, which you don't get if you just watch a concert. So I thought, well, and I had been taping on cassette the lessons, and then the MP3 recorder came out. I got the first Edirol MP3 recorder, and had like unlimited, to me, like hours and hours and hours, 64 gig of memory, and God, you could record, 150 hours of stuff with this thing. And so I was recording all the workshops, and then I thought, oh, what if I, interview these people and let the world kind of know what made them tick besides just their concerts.
Yeah.
And then at that time, Apple came out with a thing that was called iWeb, and they came out with podcasting. And so I thought, well, I just interview these people, and then I can post it, and then that'd be pretty cool, and people would know what this stuff's all about. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got started. And I started with just the podcast of the people that were at the camp. And I did like 12 or 13 interviews that 1 year at the camp. And then I got home, and I thought, well, am I going to wait till next year to interview people again, or, find some way of keeping this going? So got the podcast going, and I do a lot of traveling. I get to meet a lot of musicians, and I take my little MP3 recorder with me and sit down with people in Central Park in New York, or at a coffee shop in London, or in someplace in Paris or Spain, wherever, and do an interview. Just, what I call guerrilla podcasting. You just sitting in with whatever ambient environment, and in New York with sirens and trash trucks going by and people yelling at each other or whatever.
Yeah.
Because it gives a little bit of atmosphere to it. Mm-hmm. And so it was great. And I, write album reviews and put out the podcast, so that because I know musicians, unless you're Lady Gaga, you're not making millions of dollars doing this. So just try to help them, promote them, so that they get a little bit more exposure. Mm-hmm. But I've been on hiatus for the last 3-4 years because my website got hacked, and spam and malware and all kinds of stuff. So I took that down, and I'm slowly getting everything transferred to the new hosting, the same one you're using, and then I'm going to start up again.
Yeah. Yeah, well, over 134 episodes you have up there. And like you said, it's like guerrilla style podcasting, but the interviews are just so interesting. I listened to one, Ori Kaplan of the Balkan Beatbox.
Yes.
That was so interesting. And I really dig the music that you were playing at the end. Just what wonderful experience to be able to do that and use your career and the fact that you're traveling around the world to take advantage of being in these fantastic locations around the world, and then finding some kind of cafe or club where someone's playing some music and just go for an interview.
I found there was a group in Hawaii.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, believe it or not, there's a doctor on the Big Island.
Oh, okay.
So, could be anybody anywhere. You never know.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait, it's a great.
But like you, the interesting question is, how do you get started doing klezmer music? And people don't really, unless you're steeped in the culture, you're not growing up with it. You come to it at some point, and then you decide, that's what you like to do. And if you listen to any of them, everybody's got a different story, and it's always rather fascinating. And a lot of people from all kinds of cultural backgrounds that are performing this stuff. So it's a fun community. So between flying and music, I get around a lot.
Yeah. Has there been a particular episode that you like stands out for you that you really enjoyed more than others, maybe?
Let's see. Well, shoot, there's so many. The Balkan Beatbox is always fun. Some people I've had on multiple times. But I'm trying to think the best one. There's one called Klezmer 4. They're from Poland. And no cultural or religious background in the music, and that they just kind of learned it, and it's kind of an electrified, funky version. And I love their stuff. And there's another one in Italy that's really great also. So there's one of my favorites actually is a group called Yemen Blues, and with Ravid Kahalani. He's from Israel with a Yemenite background, and he mixes Middle Eastern rhythms with jazz and blues from America. So he's got traditional Yemenite instruments that he plays it's like a guitar kind of a thing. But he has a full string section, and he has percussionists with oodles and oodles of different percussion. He's got a horn section. Really interesting music. And I was just in a restaurant in London, Middle Eastern restaurant in London, and they were playing one of his songs on their music on the PA system.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I know that one. So you just never know.
And this is exactly the interesting part of why I started this podcast, Squawk Ident, is, here I was, the newbie at the legacy carrier, just happy to be here. I felt like I made it. My career is really where I wanted it to be. And now what? And I wanted to share my experiences and share the stories that I've heard out on the flight deck when you just ask a few questions by the person next to you, and you find out a lot about them. And you're like, wow, that's really interesting, because we're more than just pilots. We're more than just every day we go to the airport, we do our thing, we file our flight plan, whatever. We're so much more. We're come from, like you mentioned earlier, a just diverse and myriad of backgrounds from all over the world. And when you start to just ask a couple questions with sincerity and find out about the person next to you, their backgrounds and their interests were always fascinating to me. And I wanted to do a podcast that did this. What we're doing here today is we're talking about airplanes, we're talking about how we got in aviation, and we're talking about our interests and our passions. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. So definitely, if you're interested, or maybe you've never heard of klezmer music and you're like, well, what are they talking about? Go and check out this podcast. Like you said, it's been a while since you posted anything. Hopefully, I've been trying to get you to start up again. Every time we kind of talk, I kind of hint to like, oh, how's the podcast going?
Yeah, I'm kind of competing for the studio time here. So as you saw before we rolled, but I'm trying to find time when I can get back to that, or do some more guerrilla podcasting, which I really love to do. Just take the recorder and go out and meet somebody at a coffee shop or something and just sit down and chat.
Yeah. Now and we mentioned this in the intro, but what can you tell me about this production company? Your wife has a production company that you're working with, and what about Eon as well?
Yeah. So she's had various careers along the way in music and video production, and was teaching digital media at community college for the last 25 years. So has always had some kind of first music recording set up. She's done some children's music, and the 2 albums that our band has put out, we've recorded at the home studio. And now they needed at the college, they needed somebody to start teaching video. So she learned video production herself, and now she does small projects for people. And one of her main functions at her new company, Eon Reality, is to put out videos demonstrating the capabilities of their software platform. So almost every day she's making some other kind of video to demonstrate some feature of their product. So this augmented reality, virtual reality, and what they term XR, which is kind of a combination, interchangeable with either of those, is a growing field. You've heard the term metaverse. That's the new hot thing, and they're on the ground floor of all this stuff. So
wow,
it's pretty fun. You saw the video I helped make of the 777 cockpit. So people can find that. Maybe you want to link to that in your show notes. And it's sky's the limit on that thing for sure.
Yeah, and it's interesting and right up my alley, and I do appreciate you sharing that with us too. At this point, I'd like to just get into the Q&A. I know this is one of those podcasts that we're going a little longer than expected because we have such an interesting guest. But a couple of questions for you before we wrap it up. So you've had a pretty interesting career. I'd say you're very fortunate to have had such I'd say positive outlook on all of it. You haven't let the ups and downs of the industry, get in the way of how lucky we are to do this job. What has been the biggest lesson so far for flying?
Well, flying, it's all about the people, right? So you have to be quick to make the people you're flying with comfortable, and to show interest in them personally and what they're doing, other than just can they run the checklist and do the procedures, right? Because you need to be a team, and you need to be on the same team. You need to show the leadership, and beyond everything you do on the airplane, are they interesting enough? Are they willing? Do they find you interesting enough that they'll go out for dinner with you on the layover, or do something fun, while you're away from the cockpit. I was in London. I ran into now 777 captain that had been a FO with me, who I was on my trip. We flew a trip to Shanghai, and I had my brother-in-law and his family had been spending a few years working in Shanghai, and they would always come pick me up and take me out for dinner and go to the house. And I'd always invite the crew to go, and it's like they didn't want to go very often. But this fellow did, and he had a wonderful time. And I ran into him. It's been 5 years since I've seen him, and he remembered that experience. So,
oh yeah,
I think that's the main thing, is the interaction with the people. Because if we can all get through an emergency checklist, or we can all figure out an abnormal situation, we can all figure out how to deviate around the weather, and everybody knows their job really well. And it's all a matter of getting some camaraderie and how well you get along and interact with the cabin crew, the dispatchers, everybody, maintenance people. So you have to be, and I wasn't really a people person growing up, and I was a little shy, but this job forced me to get better at that. And flying with a lot of the captains when I was new that had those attributes really helped me along the way.
Yeah, I could not second that sentiment any more. I too.
I mean, just when I met you in 5 minutes, we got along really well because, we both know how to do that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's something that I think this industry, for the most part, because not everybody's like that. We've all flown with those characters that they just sit there and go.
There are those that this is work and this is their job and they don't want to think about it when they're not here. They go home and they got plenty of other things to do, and and that's fine. There's people like that in every career field, right? There's doctors that don't want to think about doctoring when they're off. So there's all kinds of people, and you just have to find. Sometimes it takes a couple of days to find a way to connect with somebody.
Yeah.
I've flown with people that pretty silent for a couple of days, and on the third day, you bring up one different thing, and that's the one thing that really interests them, and then boom, they're open up.
And then you look at them and go, "Where have you been?"
Yeah, it's like, yeah. So like you're leaving, you're saying goodbye at the end of your trip, and something comes up that triggers that, and it's that. Well, why didn't you tell me this 2 days ago?
Yeah.
That's the fun. I said, well, we'll see them again soon. You see everybody soon.
Right. Now, Keith, if some 18-year-old comes up to you and says, "Hey, I'm okay at school, and I'm doing okay, but I really am interested in being a pilot, and I want to be a pilot," would you recommend this career field to someone who's got the big starry eyes and has the thrill of the polyester and wants to?
If they have the starry eyes, definitely. If you have to do it, like some people, musicians, they have to do music. If you have to do flying, absolutely. If you're deciding between flying and being a lawyer and being a plumber or something, and you're deciding based on the opportunities, let's say in flying, which are pretty good right now.
Yeah.
I'd say get your feet wet, get started, and see if you like it. If you've been thinking about it for a long time and you really don't have other things that you're thinking about with greater weight, then yeah, absolutely dive in and go for an aviation career.
Yeah. Now, what's been your favorite destination so far?
I'm going to say Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Hong Kong is really cool. It's like Chinatown except bigger.
Yeah.
They have such a rich culture, and all the cultures around the world have gone there and set up, restaurants, some of the finest dining, anywhere. They have the famous floating restaurant that's pretty fun to go and visit. Of course, they're not letting visitors in these days, and there's no U.S. carrier that's operating there. But I kind of miss that. Plus, USC had an office and some activities going on in Hong Kong that I was participating with. They have an active alumni association, so that was pretty cool. Speaking of USC, the other thing I wanted to mention was that I've been speaking and mentoring some of the students there at the engineering school, because the program that I took got dovetailed kind of into the School of Engineering, as well as a separate School of Aviation Safety and Security now. So I go and speak to the alumni. As an alumni, I go to speak to the undergraduates and the graduate programs there, as well as speaking with. You're familiar with the AIAA?
I don't think so.
An engineering society called the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. So that's where all the engineers belong, and they have a student chapter there. I was a student member back when I was in college as well, and so I go and speak to them about what I call an alternative aviation engineering career, going into piloting, because a lot of these people want to go into aerospace engineering, and help design aircraft and systems and things like that. And I said, well, you'd be a much better engineer if you're also a pilot. And people with engineering backgrounds make really good pilots. So, I try to encourage them to consider an aviation career in addition, or maybe instead of their engineering career.
Mm-hmm. Now, the program at USC, is that a program for like a master's program, or is that a bachelor's program? What is that?
Well, they had both at the time, but yeah, I think they have undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So anyone's interested can go to their website and kind of dig a little deeper.
Right.
Yeah. Now, in all your time, you've probably flown with some real pieces of work. Is there any particular pilot that you've flown with, and no names here, but that it just was a bad situation? And how did that all transpire, and how did you handle it?
No, there was one when I was FO on the DC-10. There was one captain that was a piece of work, and because of our relative seniority, I ended up getting paired with him a lot of the time. And you just figure him out and try not to push the wrong buttons with him to set him off. And I know he was always tough on the flight engineers. And anytime a flight engineer would bring up an issue, he'd look over his shoulder and say, what's going on? And one time, this friend of mine was the flight engineer, and he was bringing something up to this captain, and I said, "Oh, here we go." And,
you didn't warn your friend ahead of time?
What's that?
You didn't warn your friend ahead of time?
I think I forgot.
Let's watch how this works out.
Yeah. There was one other time it's one of these guys that all the switches are mine and don't touch anything until I tell you, right? So, one flight we were flying through a higher layer of cloud, and would have called to turn on the engine anti-ice. So I reached up and turned on the engine anti-ice. He looked over at me and said, "I didn't tell you to turn on the engine anti-ice." And I said, "Okay." So I turned them off. So then, like 3 minutes later, he reaches over and turns on. So, that sort of thing. One other time we were ascending, we were going to Chicago. We descend and go to idle in the descent, and the number 2 engine rolled back, below minimum idle. And so everything tripped off. It looks like an engine failure. So we started seeing hydraulic lights, electrical lights, all the stuff. And he said, "Well, I have an engine failure on the number 2 engine." So, I'm thinking, well, it just kind of rolled back, it'd probably be fine at a lower altitude, but, you shut it down. And I said, "All right, well, we'll let him have his little emergency." And so we came in and we landed, made sure I told him approach control, we had an emergency and everything. And so we came in, and of course you always practice an engine out landing in whatever airplane it is. And it's a little easier in a 3-engine airplane than a 2-engine airplane. But in the 2-engine airplane and the 3-engine plane, when you have one out, you have to have a little bit extra thrust on the other engines. But he didn't on the approach. And so we impacted a little bit higher sink rate than would normally be expected. And then we taxied to the gate, and we went to the maintenance immediately came out to check the airplane. They came out to attempt a restart on the engine, and started up immediately. No problems. So, could have attempted a restart at lower altitude, but
yeah,
he wasn't open to that suggestion. So,
yeah, sometimes better to
that sort of thing.
Yeah,
like not you said, open to suggestions, right? So you have to be open to suggestions from your crew. Like go around or something like that.
Yeah, that's crucial. And it's
and those people teach you as much as the good people, right?
Exactly.
Because
yes,
you learn kind of what not to do as well as what to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is like, yeah, you got to learn from those experiences too. I like how you said, let him have his little emergency. No, we were always taught.
I'm gonna protect us. I'm not gonna let anything go, wrong.
Right.
But nothing wrong with flying around on two engines and having a little emergency. But
Right.
you could undo that emergency in a moment's notice if you just, said, hey, what if we tried to relight that engine?
Right.
But no, okay.
Yeah, that's a great story. Now, a final few questions here. Who has had the biggest influence in your career and why?
I'm going to go back to that high school teacher that ran our flying club at the high school, because he, more than anybody, got us interested. And even though we didn't touch an airplane, didn't go anywhere, we'd go and visit the airport and the facilities and things like that. We had a pretty good network of people in the industry, but just to sit around and plot out cross countries and there was, I don't know, 20 of us, and we'd see who did the best plotting and who did the closest calculation to what was going to be. And that, more than anything else, I think got us pointed in the right direction. He pointed me towards San Jose State, and because there was other choices, Embry-Riddle and places like that at the time, but my family didn't have the resources to send me to that. So San Jose State, by the way, was $97 a semester.
Holy crap.
And I think I paid $1,500 for the full school year for the dorms and the three meal plan.
Oh my God.
Yeah, $97 and I had to take some loans to cover the dorms and the meal
housing,
plan.
yeah.
But of course, my dad was great because he was paying for my flight training out of pocket. So, by the way, the paying my flight training at Torrance with the Civil Air Patrol fellow I mentioned to you had the 150. He was charging us $9 an hour wet for the airplane and nothing for his instruction time.
Wow, can you imagine? And
so
maybe that's another reason.
I spent in the neighborhood of $500 for my private.
Oh my God. Maybe that's the reason. That's another reason, another hurdle. I mean, we mentioned not having,
it was a lot more accessible then.
Yeah.
Right. When you're paying close to $200 an hour for playing an instructor.
Right.
It's not as accessible for most people.
Right. And I think that's why that opinion, because that's all it really is, that opinion that only rich people become pilots, it's not true. It's a complete false narrative to get into. My parents used to tell me that all the time. Oh, we're not that rich. You cannot be a pilot. And I love them dearly, but they believed those rumors. They believed that opinion. And it wasn't until later that I knew that that wasn't the case. Anyone can do it. Yes, you might have challenges financially, but there are always ways. You can work other jobs while you're training. You don't have to get your private pilot license and all your other ratings within 12 months. You only do that if you're in a program and you're in some kind of hurry for a career or you're all in, but you don't have to be. Some people pick up their private and then they just don't really use it and they get other jobs and they start a family and they move on and they come back.
More of a hobby. You get a private and you go fly around with your family and go have fun and take trips and do things, and that, like having a boat, right? It's like people have boats. They're not going to be commercial mariners, but they have a boat.
Right.
Or a motorhome or a motorcycle or whatever, and people would have an airplane and go do airplane stuff. But we used to pay $19 an hour for 172, $30 for a 182. When I got into multi, I was paying $63 an hour for a Duchess. I got into the Baron, we were paying $95 an hour for the Baron. So, which relatively speaking was expensive, but the numbers have changed, but people's ability to pay has also kind of been reduced as a result of that. So
yeah, I think that's why the cadet
Harder.
programs are so crucial now. I know United and Delta both have their own flight training facility where, if you go to you get accepted into their program, you have a guaranteed job or job interview at the end of it, and they help get you the financing. There are so many avenues. We can't just go, oh, well, it's too expensive, put your hands up and walk away and decide to go, be a plumber or electrician. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but, there are
Right.
always, like you said earlier, if they've
if
got
you
the
want to do it
stars,
bad enough, you find a way.
right? If they got the twinkle in their eye, it's going to happen. They'll find a way. And some methods are smarter than others. Some people get in a humongous financial debt because they're convinced they got to do this. Yeah, all good now, 20 years in, but yeah, it was a huge burden for myself. I went to a flight school in Arizona. I did the whole 10-month program with the mock ground school, airline ground school program, because you have to have that. I could have taken my time and kept my job where I was making decent money in my first career and kind of just worked my way through all my ratings, building my time. It would have taken me maybe an extra couple of years, but in the grand scheme of things, after you look back on a long career, sometimes those decisions, you look back and you go, well, yeah, I could have taken my time, or I could have enjoyed flying that airplane or for that carrier a little longer, those were good times. But unfortunately, none of us have that crystal ball. Yeah. So final question. If you can go back in time and whisper just for a moment in your own younger self's ear, what would you tell yourself?
I tell myself, good job. You made the right choices. What I knew about the industry was very, not that much at the time. And I asked every airline person I found and said, how did you get here? What do you recommend? And of course, everybody had a different story. The military pathway is easy. And I did consider that, but I felt that staying on the civilian route would be a faster track to the airlines. As soon as you get enough qualifications, you could go. In the military, you have a window. You had to wait till you separated, and you had your 5 years or 8 years, sign up for another tour or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you have to hope when you get out that the airlines are still hiring. And if they're not hiring, then you're out of the military and you don't have a job, and you got to wait till the hiring cycle starts again. So, I ultimately chose to, even though I was working at the Marine Corps base and interacting with Marines every day, and they all advised me about what to do if I wanted to go in the military. The Marines, they were in the Marines, your main job is your ground job. It's not the flying part. And they had a requirement that you had to have a minimum of 4 hours a month to maintain your flight qualification. And I'm like, no, I want to fly more than 4 hours a month. And so, I chose against that. I had also applied for FAA air traffic control as a backup, and I passed that test, and I skipped 4 different class dates that they offered me for air traffic control. Mm-hmm. And finally, after the 4th one, they said, well, you're not really interested in being an air traffic controller, are you? I said, no, I guess not.
Yeah.
But I think I hit all the benchmarks along the way at the right time. Certainly having the master's degree helped because another box to check on the application. Mm-hmm. And then at the airlines, because again, I'm competing with military people that are always the first preference. But by the time I got to Legacy, I had a master's degree in 4,200 hours. The only thing I would have done differently was maybe to get my CFI sooner, because I was also doing NIFA, the National Intercollegiate Flying Association. They would have competitions, spot landings and things like that. And their rule was that you couldn't participate if you were a CFI. So, and I really wanted to do it, so I delayed doing the CFI a year until after I graduated, so I could participate in that. Other than that, I think I did the best I could, and I would probably do it all the same way again.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, your insights on aviation and all that you do. So anyone that's out there that wants to learn more about you and the production company and the podcast, where can they find you?
Let's see. Well, social media is the easiest way. Just look up Klezmer Podcast for me. Look up Eon Reality, EON Reality, and Renzone. So you can RENZONE. You can look it up anywhere, and look forward to hearing from people.
Yeah, and just one final thank you to you for coming on the show. It's been an honor to be able to sit here and listen to your story. Also, thank you to Alex for joining us earlier in the podcast. Good luck, Alex, with all your training out there. I know you have all our listeners are rooting for you. So keep up the good work. And please help us out by sharing this podcast online and with your friends. Be sure to subscribe or follow the Squawk Ident podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. We also love receiving audio and video listener feedback. You can send us feedback via an email or even from the link on our website. And that's at www.aviatortony.com. That's Alpha Victor, the number 8, Romeo Tango Oscar November Yankee.com. There you'll find audio archives, photos from the flight line, guest book, photo tab, pilot shop, and much, much more. You can also contribute financially to our program right there from our homepage. Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram users can find us under Squawk Ident Podcast or Aviator Tony and Squawk Ident. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen to these grateful aviators. Keep the dirty side down out there, be safe, and take care of each other. Bye, everyone.
Can you fly this plane and land it?
It's an entirely different kind of flying. Do you know anything about planes?